Another useful tool for the commodity basis is actually using it to try and predict the local cash price. So remember in the last few slides we were talking about how the commodity basis tends to hold true seasonal patterns. It stays relatively the same seasonally year after year. We see that it's going to be strengthening at the same times of years and weakening at the same times of years. And on top of that, if you look back at that 5-year average and 10-year average and looking at those previous graphs, we can see that on average, the prices, the local commodity basis stays relatively the same year after year after year within, a little bit of a variance, but it stays relatively the same. So now the futures prices may change, but the basis is staying relatively the same. So we can actually use that to our advantage, and we can use that as actually a relatively simple, low-cost method of trying to predict cash price. So no question is more difficult to answer than what price can I expect? Every producer is always going to be worried about that. What price can I expect for my goods? That's why they bring in hedging and futures and options and things like that to try and lock in those prices. So always looms in a producer's or agribusiness's decision. What prices can I expect for my inputs and my outputs? Because both of those are a key factor in whether or not I'm going to stay profitable and whether or not I'm going to continue to run my operation the way I need to and the way I want to. It also helps us decide what crops to plant based on input costs and expected prices. So, for example, whenever the ethanol mandate was in place, we saw that corn prices were were higher than normal and double in some cases. And a lot of people actually switched from other row crops to corn and started planting more corn. So, they made that decision based off of these expected prices. And in turn, it had ripple effects on other row crops because the supply of other row crops was down and caused those prices to rise as well. But they were worried about what price or what plant should they plant based off of those input costs and those expected prices. So being able to estimate those expected prices and estimate those input costs are going to be an important factor in even making those production decisions. Should I forward price my crop or should I store it? So what if the expected price during the middle of December is 3 times as high as what it is during the middle of the summer and you're harvesting in the summer? Well, maybe you can afford the storage. What is the expected price? And it helps make all of these different decisions. And then also agribusinesses must determine price expectations to know what forward price to offer. So they're always wondering what price can I expect for both inputs and outputs because of all of these different things. The aspect of what crops should I plant? What production should I get into? Should I forward price or should I store my crops? What price should I try to obtain, do forward price to at least make a profit? So these commodity futures exchange, we said that one of the 3 primary goals was to serve as a defined price discovery system. It serves as a price discovery system, and remember in one of the very first slides we talked about that in chapter 10, that one of the 3 main goals was that price discovery system. Now, this commodity futures market, or the commodity futures exchange, is an exchange from producers all over the nation. I mean, we're talking about a nationwide exchange, futures exchange, a nationwide commodity market with very little barriers to entry and exit and very little barriers virtually anywhere. So it is a well-defined price discovery system because we have so many buyers and so many sellers. It actually determines it to be a well-defined price discovery system. Whereas local markets may not be as well defined. They're not as well defined because there's a lot less buyers and there's a lot less sellers competing against each other. So this historical basis provides a link between the local and the futures markets. And if you remember, that commodity basis is the cash price minus the futures, and it links those two together. So it helps take that well-defined price discovery system and link it to this maybe not so well-defined. And the reason that you see discrepancies between the commodity futures exchange and then the local markets are various reasons. Stuff like the aspect that there's a lot more buyers and sellers in this scenario, where there's not as many down here in the local markets. Another aspect is transportation and actually storing those commodities and transporting those commodities. For example, if you're say a cattle producer in Wyoming, and there's not very many feedlots in Wyoming, and you've got to haul it down to, say, Fort Collins, or down into northern Colorado or the Front Range of Colorado to sell your cattle, well, you're going to have a higher transportation cost than somebody who's located right there, right beside a feedlot. And because of those aspects, they change the price between the local markets and the futures markets are different. But also, the more important aspect is these local markets may not be well defined simply because they don't have as many buyers and sellers. There's not as many people trading that particular commodity. And this historical basis, like I said, it does provide a link between the local and futures market. So how can we take this method of using the commodity basis and turn it into this low cost, this simple, and this relatively good predictor of cash price? So all we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is actually adjust the futures contract price for a multi-year historical basis. So if you tracked your historical basis and looked at it year after year, you could come up with, say, the 5-year average or the 10-year average or the 15-year average or the 3-year average. Notice that we're saying it's a multi-year. We're not dealing with a single year. We're dealing with a multi-year historical basis. So we're going to be taking the average of, say, the past 5 years, for example. So then we're going to take that basis, and now all these little e's in this equation down here, that means expected. So we have our expected basis. And our expected basis is going to be that 5-year average, looking at that 5, or that 10-year average, that multi-year historical basis. We know that the commodity basis should stay relatively the same, but it is going to fluctuate a little bit from year to year. So we're going to use that multi-year historical basis, throw in some variances, look at the max, look at the minimum, and kind of compare those to where we know where our outliers are. But we're going to use that multi-year historical basis, and that's going to be, like I said here, our estimated basis. And then we're going to try and estimate our cash price. Now, the reason that there is no E in front of futures price is because we know what futures price is. We can look that up. We can look at the CME group and find that futures price. So remember that the commodity basis is futures price minus the cash price. So now we're going to look for that cash price. So we're simply going to just adjust this equation real quick. We're going to just simply take the cash price, and we said it's cash price minus the futures, and we're just going to add the futures over here to this basis. So I added in this text box real quick, and let's go ahead and look at the commodity basis. So we have the commodity, or the basis, is equal to the cash, if I can type this today, the cash minus the futures. So how do we get to where we're solving just for cash? Well, we're going to add futures onto both sides. So we have the basis plus the futures equals the cash. So because we're running off of a 5-year or a multi-year historical basis, that stays relatively the same from year to year, and we're going to add that to the futures price that we know. We can come up with this expected cash price. And just for a little bit of reference, this T is a future contract of interest. Because we're dealing with we can look up multiple futures contracts. Whenever we're dealing with the futures price, we're looking up for the futures price of that particular contract of interest.